Now back home, 2022 has been a very busy year, globally as well as locally. Eskom woes no doubt grabbed the headlines for almost the entire year, from higher stages of load shedding to the resignation of the CEO. President Ramaphosa also faced a tough year following allegations of a possible cover-up of a theft at his Phalaphala farm. Recently, the president axed Western Cape Judge President John Hlophe following a recommendation by the Judicial Service Commission. News Startup Explain.co.za founder Verashni Pillay joins us now to unpack this. Verashni, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Now, Eskom has been the pain for so many South Africans. With over 200 days of darkness, is there any hope for us that there'll be less days of darkness in 2023?
Well, the only hope that we as South Africans have is that we can in fact make good on the funding that was given to us at the last COP, where we were given $8.5 billion in funding to transition away from coal to renewable energy. Now, that's going to be a long, messy and tricky road ahead. It's also a very political road, but the future does not lie in fixing Eskom as we know it, nor does it rely on depending on dwindling coal supplies. So we have a tricky period ahead, and Ramaphosa will have to deal with people who disagree with this process, like Gwede Mantashe in his cabinet, in order to make the future a reality. But it's going to take us a while to get there before we have steady electricity supply.
And in fixing some of those problems, we know that the CEO, Andre de Ruyter, recently resigned, and his resignation we will see him moving out of the office in March of 2023. Do you think that South Africans believe that Eskom has a leadership problem, or is it a resource problem? Will appointing someone with an engineering qualification, for instance, solve our problems with the utility?
Well, that's a good question, because that has been the raging debate. On one hand, there are those who say it is a poison chalice of a role. Andre de Ruyter lasted longer than most of his predecessors. I mean, one was taken out in a stretcher, according to some reports, because they could not handle the pressure of this incredibly difficult role. So on one hand, can anyone do the role? On the other hand, there are those who say, well, Andre de Ruyter did not have the technical background. So those are valid concerns, but the real issue is that this is a utility that is running on empty. The stations have been pushed to their breaking point with not enough maintenance. There are so many issues that one person would be very hard-pressed to fix, no matter what their technical background. It requires a great overhaul.
It most certainly does. Now, one of the other top stories was the axing of Western Cape Judge President John Hlophe. Do you think that this, for South Africans, is a move in the right direction with regards to rooting out corruption, especially in the judicial system?
I believe it absolutely was a step in the right direction. Now, remember that our judiciary has been the last bulwark against some major issues in our country. When we were in the state capture years and it felt like we were about to go over the precipice where corruption was concerned, it was our judiciary that has time and again pulled us back, been that one thing in the sand that has held firm against the currents of major corruption. So for the judiciary itself to have any issues would be devastating for our democracy. It is vital that our judiciary is above any kind of criticism, especially considering that there are those who will seek to cast aspersions on our judiciary. Now, there are, of course, human men and women in these positions, but nonetheless, we have to ensure that they are above reproach, and bringing out people like John Hlophe, who has such a checkered history, is really important.
But do you think, with all the conversations that had happened this year, especially with regards to the judiciary, has their image been tainted in any way, especially in the minds of South Africans?
Well, I think there are those who are sympathetic to the so-called RET faction in the ANC and also in the EFF. And you've seen someone like Lindiwe Sisulu, the minister, becoming the kind of poster woman for criticizing the judiciary, saying some really harsh stuff against, Raymond Zondo and other people. And we also saw with the release of Chris Hani's killer, some really strong words directed against our judiciary, and a lot of South Africans feeling a little bit jaundiced, and those who are, like I say, sympathetic to the RET faction, feeling like, are they just out to protect white capital interests? But I really think that is not true, and is perhaps even a red herring to the real issues South Africa faces. And we face economic economic and social issues. And it's easier to blame people like the judiciary instead of looking at the real core issues that we have.
Well, we can't speak of the year 2022 without speaking about the Phala Phala Farmgate scandal, which saw our president possibly facing a process of impeachment. Do you think he'll be able to shrug this cloud off in the year 2023?
You know what? Phala Phala is going to follow our president for a very long time. I don't think he's going to ever shrug it off entirely. But what I do find very interesting is that he's come back from the Phala Phala kind of crisis that happened towards the end of the year, that almost saw him resign before the impeachment happened, or the vote rather. We saw him come back from that crisis almost emboldened, right? He's now seen the exact state of his enemies, and the answer was, they're more bark than bite, right? They didn't even have a proper coherent strategy to unseat him at the impeachment vote. There were scattered responses. Some showed up, some didn't. So there was a big cloud over Ramaphosa running up to the ANC elective conference that has just passed. But he is comfortably in the lead, right? He had double his closest contender, Zweli Mkhize. Then the report comes out and everyone's going, what on earth? The man's going to resign. But we see the ANC really rally around him in this time because guess what? He's their last hope. You know, they don't really have a very strong contender to convincingly win the next general election. So he's come out of the stronger within the ANC, and we saw that in the numbers in the top 7, as it's now called in the ANC, where 5 out of those 7 leaders in the ANC that were elected were in Ramaphosa's camp, which means he's got a stronger hand in the ANC. So to answer your question, Phala Phala is always going to haunt him, but he does have a stronger hand in the ANC right now.
And will that strong hand carry him through to the 2024 elections? Do you think South Africans are as forgiving?
You know, Ramaphosa has consistently polled in national polls above his party. The party's not stupid. They know that. They know that they're clinging on to their majority, their national above 50% majority by the skin of their teeth, right? They are really, and they don't really have a succession plan. That's the most concerning thing about the ANC. All the people who could take over from Ramaphosa don't inspire that as much confidence as he does, his flaws notwithstanding, amongst the electorate, amongst the investors. There are those who are vociferous critics of Ramaphosa, but on the whole, he is kind of the most popular leader in the ANC. So we saw when he was almost going to resign, some real concern in the markets, real concern amongst South Africans that this man was going to go. So the ANC might not like him, South Africans might not like him, but he's kind of like the last hope, which says a lot about our political leadership. So I do believe that he's going to maybe even lead the ANC to another, majority before the inevitable decline and the party slipping below 50% in the future and being forced into coalitions.
Lastly, Verashni, with everything that's happening in South Africa, from load shedding to Phala Phala and lack of service delivery, do you think that South Africans are just hopeful going into 2023?
We're not a very hopeful country. Unless there's a convincing rugby win or sport win, it feels like we are really beat ourselves up. And, there is reason to beat ourselves up considering how bad things have been with the electricity to the state of our political leadership. Who are we going to all vote for next year? I mean, that's the answer. That's a question a lot of South Africans are asking themselves. However, I would argue that South Africans should be grateful because this year was a year of accountability. We saw the Guptas arrested in UAE. We saw all kinds of things happening. We saw Machela Koko, all kinds of important people being arrested. So I think it was a good year.
It certainly was. Thank you so much for that review of South Africa 2022. That's Verashni Pillay from News Startup Explain.co.za. She's the founder, giving us their roundup of our top stories in 2022.